It all starts with a twist. You're watching the launch trailer, a game based on Ninja Gaiden. Whoa, you don't see that every day. Your interest is piqued. Levels look good, bosses look fun, music sounds tight. All of a sudden, 8-bit turns to 16-bit and Sabotage Studios have played their first card. The Messenger is a throwback game where you morph between 8-bit and 16-bit. Cool twist on an otherwise normal-looking 2D platformer. You buy and finish the game over the next couple of days. It is now on your favorites list. Now, imagine the you in this scenario isn't actually you. It's me, but it could be a future you. Let me give it to you straight. The Messenger is not a game you should miss. Whether you have experience with that era of platforming is irrelevant. The game's fun, and certainly has enough content for $20 if you care about that kind of thing. I'd like to talk about why this seemingly standard 2D platformer captured a person who, by all accounts, has no reverence for them. And to do that, we've got to talk about the Messenger's simple twist. The Messenger seamlessly blends an 8-bit and 16-bit universe as a heroic ninja turned messenger must traverse a dangerous path to save his village from the Demon King. As this launch trailer description elevator pitch would have you believe, this is the hook Sabotage Studios have gone with. Sell a Ninja Gaiden clone with a unique twist, and that'll get enough people on board. Hell, I haven't even played Ninja Gaiden, and it got me interested enough to try it out. It feels as though there was a strong vision here, at least in terms of the level design and control ethos. Starting with a simple set of maneuvers gives you the chance to familiarize yourself with the controls and enemy behaviors, especially if this is your first foray into a Ninja Gaiden-like experience as it was for me. The enemies walk back and forth, impeding your progress, they shoot fireballs at you in a predictable 2-shot pattern, they crawl on the ground with a smaller hitbox, they throw spikes in an irregular arc above you, each of them tests something. The fireballs can be dodged either by ducking, halting your forward momentum, or jumping with the right timing, maintaining your forward momentum. You'll learn quickly that one is more efficient than the other, but both are viable options nonetheless. These spikes that are thrown overhead test your positioning, and ask you to do more than simply hold the forward button and jump. They aren't so bad in the beginning, but as the level progresses, they'll be on moving platforms, swinging above a few spike pits and enemies that barrel towards you. Attempting to manage all these elements at once can be tough, and it's where the Messenger's level design shines. While your options are always expanding, so too does the game's expectations of you. An ability you start the game with, the Cloud Jump, is underutilized near the beginning. You're taught how to use it in the opening tutorial, but the first level will never require that you use it. Instead, they litter the level with these Toro, Japanese lanterns. You're taught to use it on these lanterns, and so you begin to associate the lanterns with the Cloud Jump. Ignoring these lanterns is never a good idea because they'll always have something useful in them. Sometimes it's currency, sometimes it's ki, sometimes it's health. Point being, you're pushed to interact with these things in one form or another, which helps push you into learning the Cloud Jump so that its more advanced uses later on won't appear too jarring. You'll start using them on projectiles and enemies to transition more smoothly into a wall jump or glide, for example. It's imperative that the groundwork is set early on. I appreciate the courage the Messenger has in testing every skill in its levels. By the end of the game, you'll have a Cloud Jump, a Wall Jump, a Wingsuit, a Grappling Hook, and each of these abilities have specific use cases that would encourage you to use one over the other. Using a Cloud Jump after an attack is quick and easy, with less airtime as a trade-off. The Grappling Hook is more precise and easier to screw up, but it gives you a boost both vertically and horizontally, giving you more airtime. It might be easy to fall back on that simple attack into Cloud Jump, and the game cleverly realizes this by spacing the lanterns farther apart to incentivize the use of the grappling hook more and more, especially when all you have between you and a bottomless pit are flying enemies that have smaller hitboxes. The wingsuit may seem like it only serves one purpose. Sure, you can glide across gaps, up gusts of air, and in between saw blades, but there's always room to use the downward slash upgrade you can nab from the shopkeep. While this upgrade is never explicitly required to progress, it gives you by far the most vertical height when used on an enemy or lantern. Pair that with the ability to use the cloud jump directly afterward, and then continue gliding after that, the wingsuit proves to be incredibly useful. I particularly like its uses in some of the challenge rooms, where it may be the last thing you ever think to use. This room in the Rivière Turquoise, for example, has a set of lanterns that form the shape of a U, with fireballs circling each of them. Initially, I thought to use my regular cloud jump, which was the easiest method to stay afloat. When that proved impossible, I started using my grappling hook for extra height and distance, but it still wasn't working. What the game actually wants here is for you to use the wingsuit downward slash for extra height and then immediately exit into a cloud jump. Upon entering the room, it felt like that power stone was impossible to reach, and upon exiting, I was a master of a mechanic I was too quick to neglect. The Messenger certainly has a way of familiarizing you with the intricacies of its various mechanics. It has the audacity to force you out of your comfort zone, and it gets away with minimal frustration since checkpoints are placed liberally. There isn't a life system, so you're free to keep bashing your head into the wall until you get a specific section right. Quarble is technically a punishment for death, in that he'll eat up all the gems you collect, but he's more of a countermeasure. Very rarely did he prevent me from getting new gems, he mostly existed to prevent me from getting even more gems by simply recollecting the same gems over and over again. Quarble ensures that you won't be swimming in money until very late into the game, and I appreciate that as a punishment for death far more than the back to the title screens of old. It meant that I was always hungering to learn more, to get better. This first half of the game could almost be seen as a way to condition you, to get you used to the game's various traversal mechanics and turn you into a bona fide master ninja. The amount of levels you get before the first big twist seem fairly typical in their scope and sense of escalation. Each level throws a new challenge your way, makes some of that previous platforming slightly harder, until it coalesces in a big set of challenges capped by a boss fight testing everything you've learned. You go from the Autumn Hills, to the Catacombs, to the Bamboo Creek, to the Howling Grotto, to the Quilshoom Marsh, to the Searing Crags, to the Glacial Peak, and finally to the Tower of Time. Now, consider that up to this point everything is incredibly well designed, but it lacks a sense of unpredictability. Everything you're doing, while super fun, seems expected. The story tells of the elusive Western hero said to bring an ancient scroll to the top of a mountain peak to fend off the coming demon invasion. Tragedy strikes early, and so it's up to an inexperienced ninja to carry the scroll to the top of the mountain, hence the title. What's funny then is that this game is acutely aware of this. You fall down a pit and suddenly you're in the shop. The shopkeep starts droning on about the three sages at the top of the mountain, and the ninja mentions all that text is too much for one dialogue box. At first, this seems a little out of place, and I groaned, because oh boy, here comes the fourth wall breaking humor. I find that stuff can sometimes be a little too on the nose, a little too try-hard maybe. Especially when it's just, oh hey look, there's a lot of text in that text box. Oh wow, I'm self-aware that we're in a video game. Neat. Over time though, it grew on me. It started commenting on play habits and how standard everything was. When the shopkeep gives you the wingsuit, he tries to explain to you where it came from and its importance to the world, but eventually says, screw it, just take the suit, you don't actually care anyway. Then expounds upon this joke when you get the grappling hook, which actually has an official name, but he writes it off by saying you'll probably just end up calling this the grappling hook anyway. So many games have fancy names for these upgrades, and yet it's strikingly accurate that most players will refer to the thing as a grappling hook because it's an easy shorthand. You don't call the wall jump the climbing clause, now do you? Many of these jokes and story beats don't just disappear, they expand as the game progresses. The shopkeeper's cabinet is the most blatant example. If you try to check the cabinet, he'll keep telling you not to open it, eventually leading to him punishing you by telling you a really long story that you can't skip. There's one point where the shopkeep isn't in the shop, and just when you think you can sneak a look at that cabinet, he bursts in and comments on how you thought it would be that easy. He tells you another story about curiosity and the meaning of life, and questions why you're so interested in that damn cabinet. It has an incredible payoff when you learn what's in it, yet another of the game's many twists I'll get into shortly. This isn't the only one though. Every boss you fight is relevant later in some way. Besides the first one, he doesn't really do anything. The Undead Lord and his talking staff let you access an area later on, along with a visual twist that the Undead Lord who taunts you throughout the level with his imposing figure is actually really short. The giant golem is actually a spirit minding his own business, digging for gems in the grotto. You make him sad when you blow up his golem. This one got to me a little bit. The leader of the Quilshroom Marsh, the one responsible for the environment turning so deadly, is actually a former messenger who failed in her mission and becomes a key part of the plot later on. I mean, you look at this chick and you don't think that at first. You think she's just gonna be a boss fight and then you move on, but she comes back later. She does the thing with you. If you just play and avoid chatting with the shopkeep, you might think the game has witty dialogue and nothing more. You're not gonna know that the boss you just fought was a fallen messenger if you don't care to know, which makes it all the more surprising later when you save her. It's shocking just how many of these little stories the game has. Lines that you initially think are throwaway come back in the latter half. This dragon called Manfred that you befriend to escape the underworld is named Manfred because he dreams of becoming a butler. This could have just been a throwaway joke. An effective one, no doubt, but throwaway all the same. Instead, you eventually go to the Elemental Skylands and fight a giant robot butler who takes Manfred on as an apprentice. Sabotage Studios went above and beyond in every aspect of this game's design, and it shows. Even little details like this are never forgotten. Again, this stuff might not show itself to you for a while, especially if you treat it as if it was a bog-standard 2D platformer. That is, until you get to the first twist. The Messenger is actually about time travel. You can switch back and forth between the normal 8-bit present and the 16-bit future. With this comes not only a change in the visuals, but a change in the soundtrack, enemy placement, and overall level design. It, like many of the Messenger's other mechanics, eases you in slowly until you start using this time travel in creative ways. At first you do a few levels without switching at all, you simply bask in the 16-bit glory, but later levels will see you switching between 8-bit and 16-bit to solve mini-puzzles. You have to think about when and where you enter these portals and how it will affect the levels. It also means that the levels you've already finished in 8-bit change when you explore them in 16-bit. Some areas are inaccessible, some rooms are made harder with the addition of enemies or the exclusion of safety platforms. Don't think of this time travel as a back-of-the-box selling point, a simple gimmick to spice up the formula. It's much more than that. It frames a vital piece of the narrative, which brings us to the second twist. The first half of The Messenger is an infinite loop. You become the Western hero at the end, delivering the scroll to your village in the far future where technology has advanced. You give the scroll to a new messenger decked out with guns and other future tech, and happen upon the next twist. The cabinet turns you into the shopkeep. Your messenger comes in mimicking player input, stopping to take in the environment, jumping around the room. Everything is coming full circle now. What you did was part of a time loop, and when your messenger doesn't return, it's revealed that he died because you didn't send Quarble after him. That's when the next twist surfaces. The messenger is a Metroidvania. This game is a fantastic throwback to classic NES platformers, namely Ninja Gaiden and Castlevania, but it slowly morphs into a tried-and-true Metroidvania, using these very same levels to constitute an explorable world. It's a genre mashup in the same way Nier Automata is an action game mixed with a shoot-'em-up, Ratchet & Clank is a third-person shooter mixed with a platformer, and Henry Hatsworth is a platformer mixed with a match-3 puzzler. All three of these examples, though, are mixed together. Nier Automata mixes shoot-'em-up and action levels from the very beginning, and even incorporates some of that gunplay into the combat itself. Ratchet & Clank often asks you to both platform and shoot enemies with stages that encourage different combinations of those two playstyles. Henry Hatsworth takes you back and forth between an action platformer and a match-3 puzzle game, briefly testing one portion of your brain before bouncing into another. The Messenger is distinct in this regard. Instead of creating a sense of harmony between two distinct genres, it keeps them separate. While the entire game is a classic platformer and every single level is designed with that in mind, the structure of a Metroidvania doesn't appear until about halfway, where suddenly you're running backwards and forwards through the levels you've already completed. There are even exclusive levels that aren't accessible until this switch happens, so you have a batch of extra endgame levels that you can access at your discretion. Of course, there are hints of this Metroidvania-like design present even in the beginning. Areas gated off by rectangular bars, secret areas with currency and items called Power Stones, and the collection of permanent movement-related upgrades. They don't drop all pretenses outright, though. You don't get a map until you're in the thick of the quest for the melodies, and you could easily think that this was a straight up Ninja Gaiden clone with upgrade trees and secrets until that point. It's hard not to be distracted by how well the levels are designed and the consistency with which you encounter new ways to interact with them. Then all of a sudden you get teleporters to areas you've been to before, a set of shortcuts in between them, and, if you can believe it, are subject to yet another twist that the scroll you've been delivering, the one you likely didn't question at all throughout your playthrough as it was a simple plot MacGuffin, is actually a map you can use to find secrets and explore the world. It was at this point, after a set of twists that left me speechless, that I thought to myself, this is something special. I mean, I had heard beforehand that you could switch to 16-bit and that it would eventually turn into a Metroidvania, but the way in which it reveals that info is unexpectedly clever. Now, allow me to break from what a few reviews have said and say that this section of the game is just as genius as the first half. It might not be perfect in its execution, but it hits enough right notes that I tend to overlook its shortcomings. I mean, what game has done this before? At this point, you've mastered the game and its mechanics, you conquered the underworld and fulfilled your duty. In the 80s, this would have been where the game ended. The messenger opts to say, cool, you mastered our game, take that toolset and show us why you mastered it. It can often feel empowering when you rush through an area of Super Metroid that once gave you trouble, and the messenger has this same satisfaction in all of its levels that you now backtrack through for music notes. You don't have a lot of direction either. This sage will give you cryptic lines, and the shopkeep will give you hints for 300 time shards, but other than that, you'll have to explore the world and see what happens. Going back to the prologue gets you a seed to plant tea leaves, with a hint that you'll need to use some time travel puzzle solving for the reward. Almost all of the boss rooms have something in them to collect that may lead to an entirely new level. You need a candle to explore the dark cave into the Riviere Turquoise, you need to free Manfred to access the elemental Skylands, which you can only do by curing the fallen messenger of her curse, you need a seashell to access the sunken shrine, and you need to rescue all the Phobikins to repair the bridge to the Forlorn Temple, cleverly named after their phobias and aptly located where they would be the most fearful. A whole new game is begun, without resetting the skill cap. In fact, these late game levels that you can choose from at will all feel similarly challenging, and they all have the chance to play with the time travel gimmick in unique ways. My favorite example is the Riviere Turquoise, which switches back and forth between a desolate present and a lush future. The moth fight at the end takes advantage of this in a fun way by revealing that this innocent moth is actually a giant bat. Yet another twist, if you want to see it that way. My point here is that the levels are still interesting, unique, and consistently challenging for a late game. It's only that accessing those levels has been changed to reflect the progression structure of a Metroidvania. It works as a gameplay twist and a story twist. This Metroidvania style of the game is distinct from the classic platformer one because you're breaking out of that infinite loop. This largely works, though I do have to point out that the world design itself isn't the most seamless of any Metroidvania I've ever played. Since most of the earlier levels are simple in design and mostly follow a straight line into an eventual upward curve, exploring this game as a world is slightly cumbersome. This is why there are teleporters that take you where you need to go. Unfortunately, there are a few instances where those teleporters are not in the most ideal locations. Getting to the Forlorn Temple, for example, is a little tedious because the warp point in the Autumn Hills is a ways away, so you have to redo this platforming chunk to reach the temple. This also happens with Manfred in the Glacial Peak, and especially the Fallen Messenger in the Quilshroom Marsh, which is probably the worst it ever gets. That said, I don't think it ruins the game. It isn't that different from the weaknesses of Metroidvanias in the first place. Sometimes Metroid games make you backtrack. That's just an inherent design choice present in the genre, and while the messenger may ask you to do some slightly inconvenient and tedious things, don't all Metroidvanias ask that of you at some point? To get from one end of the world to another? Only difference is that most Metroidvania worlds are structured like a ring to make exploring quick and seamless. The messenger could have probably used a similar world structure, maybe focusing entirely on a vertical progression so that you can fall down from the top to quickly get to a lower segment. This already sorta exists in the Glacial Peak, since getting to the bottom takes much less time than you might anticipate. I'll admit that there are some rough edges here and there, but it never detracted from my willingness to explore. I went out of my way to find every Power Stone for the sheer joy of it. The reward wasn't my goal, I just liked how hard the game made each Power Stone room. The challenge of collecting some of these Power Stones was the simple act of reaching the room in the first place. The Forlorn Temple is a challenge room that's above a set of lanterns, but you can't cling onto the wall until you advance to the next screen. So you need enough height to cloud jump up there and cling onto the wall. Initially I thought I had to do a time travel puzzle and fucked about for a while, but eventually I found my way up there. While a few of these Power Stones felt like pushovers, many times finding the room itself was the challenge. None of it involved bombing every single section of a wall either, which is part of the reason I still haven't fully completed any of the Metroid games. It's just too much busy work. The Messenger gives you the location of every room that has a secret, same as Metroid, but getting to those secret rooms feels a lot more obvious. Either it's right there in plain sight, or you just need to find a way to reach a seemingly impossible location. Exploring everything the Messenger has to offer is fulfilling, and often allows you to break the boss fights a little bit. Say you revisit the Messenger later down the line, and you probably will, I know I will. There's no damage cap to the bosses. You can deal as much damage as you want, it's entirely skill dependent. The caveat is that there are some sections where the boss becomes much harder to damage. However, if you play your cards right, you can use your various movement abilities to get more hits in. One of the best examples is this giant golem that's formed after the sages do the thing. You could wait until the hand gets close to his eye and get a couple hits in, or you could throw shurikens and continuously cloud jump to get even more hits in on that cycle, saving time and thus preventing more situations in which you could die. None of these exploits will ruin the bosses and their meaty health bars, especially because they can take so much more than you can with your fragile health bar. Face tanking isn't going to help much and is heavily discouraged. You have no way of healing yourself during boss fights, so you have very little leeway. In an era where surprises seem to vanish into thin air, leaks are aplenty, studies show that more people will watch movies if you give away the entire plot beforehand, the Messenger sticks out as a particularly ambitious undertaking. I wish I didn't know going in that I'd be treated to a Metroidvania at the end. In that sense, I guess not even the best of games can escape that inevitability. That's why the Messenger's deceptively simple set of twists is so important. It wraps up like any other game you've played. I love how the music box is the culmination of everything great about it. All of a sudden, you get some context on why the infinite loop occurred, why you're collecting the music notes, and then you're thrust into another test of your skills, almost like a second climax. The Tower of Time marked the first, and the music box marks the second, making efficient use of your ability to time travel. You fight a fairly competent final boss and wrap up with a final twist. It was all a story the shopkeep was telling a messenger. After all these stories the shopkeep tells you about the origin of the word salty and the meaning of life, after he punishes you for being curious about the cabinet by telling stories, after he tells you the entire lore of the game in great detail before the final level, you end the game learning that it was all just a story he told. Everything has a purpose. Every small detail you may have glossed over, every witty line, every side character, every mechanic, every high-level maneuver, it all comes full circle at one point or another, and it all started with what is, by all accounts, a simple twist. How beautiful is that? Time to thank the people who give me money. I'd like to shout out a few of them. Lord Arceus, Dominic Gendron Langlois, Lucas Waldeck, Roan, Tabriz Siddiq, Vitros, Nicholas Ammond, Chuck Harkins, B. Shimon, my own father, Puris Bardot, Duke091, and Christopher No. If you like the video, well, buy the video game, and tell me why you liked the video game, because you're probably gonna like it, or if you don't, then just tell me that too, I don't really care. I like spreading positivity, but if you don't like the game, then you don't like the game. Just tell me what you think down below, that's part of the reason why I still do this in the first place. It's really fun for the first few weeks until it devolves into, the cesspool that is my Zelda comments. Yeah, okay. My name is Ben King K, and I certainly hope you have some well-deserved fun today.